It all started at a community charity event, the kind where you're supposed to network, smile, and make small talk with people you've seen 100 times. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary that day, just another Saturday where I'd go, put in my appearance, and head home early. I was wandering around the tables, balancing a cup of lukewarm coffee, when I heard a familiar laugh. I froze for a moment, trying to place it. It was the kind of laugh that instantly brought back a rush of memories. I turned, and there she was, Sarah, my childhood friend. We had been inseparable once, back in elementary school. We'd done everything together, from playing on the swings to sneaking cookies at sleepovers. Then, suddenly, her family moved away, and we lost touch. Seeing her now, after all these years, was like seeing a ghost from my past. We stared at each other for a moment, both surprised, and then she broke into a big smile. I felt my face mirror hers, and we met in the middle for a hug. The conversation flowed as if no time had passed at all. We started catching up, reminiscing about old school days, the pranks we pulled, and the silly games we invented. I told her about my job, my routine, and she shared stories about her travels and her career switch. We laughed about how much we had changed and, strangely, how much we hadn't. As we talked, I noticed something odd. It felt like I was looking in a mirror. Sarah had the same wavy brown hair, the same slight dimple on her left cheek, and even the same nervous habit of biting her lower lip when she was thinking. I couldn't help but point it out, half joking that we looked like sisters. Sarah laughed and said, "Maybe we are." We joked about it, but the resemblance was undeniable. Our smiles were similar, and even the way we moved had a certain rhythm that matched. Still, I brushed it off, thinking that maybe we had just grown up in a way that made us look more alike. People often pick up traits from their closest friends, right? But it was hard to shake the strange feeling that came with it. We kept talking, and eventually, the conversation shifted to our families. I shared a bit about my dad, who has been in real estate for as long as I can remember. Sarah looked surprised and told me that her father, whom she never met, was also supposedly in real estate and had spent some time in this very town. It felt like a small world moment, one of those coincidences that make you pause for a second. But then we laughed it off and moved on. But the more we talked, the more these coincidences seemed to pile up. Sarah mentioned her mother never spoke about her father, that he was a mystery figure in her life. Meanwhile, I remembered little details from my childhood, like how my mom always seemed uneasy whenever Sarah's family came up. At the time, I never questioned it. Kids don't think about things like that. But now it felt like there might be something more to the story. We eventually exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch, making plans to meet up soon. The day ended, and I went home, still smiling from reconnecting with Sarah. It felt like I'd found a piece of my past that I didn't even realize was missing. Later that evening, I mentioned the reunion to my mom. I told her how weird it was that Sarah and I ended up crossing paths again after all these years. I casually brought up the coincidences about her father, expecting my mom to find it funny or at least interesting. Instead, her face went pale. She quickly changed the subject, talking about how busy the coming week would be, acting like she hadn't heard me at all. I tried to bring it back to the topic of Sarah, but my mom just brushed it off, saying something about not remembering much from back then. I noticed her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her cup of tea. She looked nervous, almost like she had something to hide. I didn't push it further at the moment, but I couldn't help feeling a knot forming in my stomach. My mom's reaction was so unlike her. She usually loved talking about the past, recounting stories, and reminiscing about people we knew. But this time, she shut it down completely. The sudden shift in her demeanor left me unsettled, and for the first time, I wondered if there was something more to this story than I'd realized. That night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about Sarah and the strange coincidences between our families. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it, that it was all just a string of random events. But my mom's reaction played over in my mind, again and again like a broken record. It was a look I had never seen before, a mix of fear and guilt, perhaps. I had no idea what it meant, but I knew I had to find out. Update 1. After my mom's strange reaction, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't telling me. The coincidences, the nervous change of subject, it all seemed too weird. I decided to start digging a little deeper, hoping to find some answers. The next morning, I casually asked my dad if he remembered Sarah's family from when we were kids. He shrugged, seeming genuinely clueless. He mentioned he wasn't close to many people back then, especially after Sarah's family moved away. His reaction seemed natural, almost dismissive, as if he didn't think there was anything significant about it. But my mom was different. Every time I brought up Sarah or her family, she seemed tense, like she was on edge. One evening, while helping her with dinner, I tried again. I asked if she remembered Sarah's mom or anything about their family. She glanced at me, her smile a little too tight, and said she didn't recall much, that it was all so long ago. But I could tell she was lying. Her hands moved a bit too quickly as she chopped vegetables, her eyes avoiding mine. I needed more information, so I called Sarah. We met up a few days later at a quiet cafe, where we could talk without interruptions. I mentioned how my mom seemed weirdly nervous whenever I brought up her family. Sarah nodded, saying that her mom had always been secretive about her dad. She tried to ask about him a few times growing up, but her mom always shut it down, saying it was best not to know. We both felt a growing curiosity, maybe even a shared sense of determination to figure out what was going on. We decided to look into it together. We started by searching through old family photo albums. I went through stacks of dusty pictures in our attic, while Sarah did the same at her place. After a few hours, I found something, an old photo from a neighborhood barbecue. There, right in the middle, were our moms, standing side by side, smiling like they were the best of friends. They seemed comfortable, like they'd known each other forever. I texted a picture of it to Sarah immediately, and she sent back a photo of her own, one she found in her mom's drawer. The same event, the same outfits, but taken from a different angle. It was clear that our moms had been in the same social circles. It wasn't just a passing acquaintance. There were a few more photos, too, one of them at some kind of fundraiser, another at a baby shower. They were always next to each other, always looking close. It was strange. I had never heard my mom talk about Sarah's mom in that way, not once. I couldn't help but wonder why she had kept it from me. I took the photos to my mom later that evening, hoping to get some answers. I placed them on the kitchen counter, one by one. At first she looked surprised, like she hadn't expected me to find them. Then her face hardened. She said it was nothing, just an old friendship from a long time ago, and she tried to brush it off again. But this time I pushed a bit harder, asking why she never mentioned they were so close. My mom's response was defensive. She insisted there was nothing to tell, that sometimes people grow apart and that there was no big mystery to it. But I could see the discomfort in her eyes, the way she was holding back. I decided not to push further that night, but it only confirmed my suspicion that there was more to this story than she wanted to admit. Feeling more determined than ever, I met up with Sarah again. We decided to take our search online, scouring old social media posts, local newspaper archives, and community records. After a few days, we found a few more pieces of the puzzle. There were mentions of events where our moms had attended together, local charity functions, and even a few business luncheons. They clearly moved in the same circles, almost like they were part of the same tight-knit community. Then we stumbled upon something more interesting, a brief mention in a decades-old community newsletter. It was a small blurb about a fundraiser hosted at my house, with both our moms listed as organizers. The detail seemed insignificant at first, but then Sarah pointed out that it was from around the time her mom moved away with her family. I couldn't help but think that there was a connection there. With all these little details piling up, I decided to confront my mom again. This time, I showed her everything we had found, the photos, the newsletters, all the evidence of a close relationship between her and Sarah's mom. She looked uncomfortable but still insisted it was all just a coincidence, that they were just friends for a short time, and that it meant nothing. She seemed defensive, almost angry. She even raised her voice a bit, saying that I shouldn't be digging into things that don't concern me. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of fear maybe, that told me she was hiding something. I knew I wasn't going to get any more out of her at that moment, so I let it go, at least for now. The next day, I got an unexpected message from a distant relative, a cousin I barely knew. It was cryptic and vague, saying, "I've heard you're asking about the past. There's more to know than you think. Talk to Aunt Mary if you want real answers." Aunt Mary was my dad's sister, known for her sharp tongue and her love of family gossip. She was the one everyone went to for stories about old family drama. I felt a chill run down my spine. What did Aunt Mary know that my mom didn't want to tell me? And why was there so much secrecy around something that seemed so simple on the surface? I knew I had to find out. Update 2. With the cryptic message from my distant cousin still fresh in my mind, I decided to pay a visit to Aunt Mary. She was my dad's sister, known in the family for her sharp wit and even sharper memory. If anyone knew the truth, it would be her. I called ahead, and she sounded delighted to have me over. I didn't mention why I was coming. I wanted to catch her off guard to see her unfiltered reactions. When I arrived, Aunt Mary greeted me warmly, her eyes bright with curiosity. After some small talk, I brought up the reason for my visit. I casually mentioned Sarah, describing our unexpected reunion and how strange it was to discover our mothers had once been so close. I asked if she knew anything about it. Aunt Mary paused, her expression shifting slightly. She glanced around as if checking that no one else was listening. Then, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. She told me that my mom and Sarah's mom had indeed been best friends for years. They were inseparable, always at each other's houses, attending every event together. But something had happened, something big, that caused a rift between them. She wasn't sure of all the details, but she remembered a falling out around the time Sarah was born. I pressed for more information, and Aunt Mary seemed to enjoy the attention, savoring the chance to share what she knew. She hinted at rumors, whispers that had floated around back then. She said people had talked about an affair, but no one knew for certain who was involved or what exactly had happened. The rumors were vague, pointing fingers at either my dad or Sarah's dad as being the potential father of Sarah. I felt a shiver run down my spine. This was more than I had expected. I realized that the odd coincidences, the shared resemblances, and the secretive behavior from both our moms weren't just in my head. Aunt Mary's story made it clear. There was a real possibility that Sarah and I were more than just old friends. I thanked Aunt Mary for her time and left, my mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts. I called Sarah right away, and we met up at the park. I laid everything out for her. Every detail Aunt Mary had shared, every rumor, every suspicion. She listened quietly, her expression a mix of disbelief and concern. We both knew what we had to do next. even if it felt surreal. We agreed to get a DNA test to find out the truth once and for all. The following day, we went to a local clinic that offered DNA testing. It was a simple process, just a quick swab of our cheeks, filling out some forms, and handing everything over to the lab technician. They told us it would take about a week to get the results. As we left the clinic, there was a heavy silence between us, a shared anxiety about what we might discover. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop noticing all the little things. Sarah and I had so many similarities, things I'd never paid attention to before. Our voices had a similar pitch, we both had the same way of tilting our heads when we listened, and even our handwriting looked oddly alike. I started seeing patterns everywhere, little details that now seemed to scream for attention. Sarah and I spent more time together while we waited for the results. We compared stories about our childhoods, looking for more clues. She mentioned how her mom had once told her about a man who'd been important in her life, someone she'd had to let go of for complicated reasons. I remembered hearing my mom mention a friend who had a messy breakup around the same time. The pieces started fitting together, almost too neatly. As the days passed, the anxiety grew. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be the lab with the results. It felt like we were holding our breath, waiting for the truth to reveal itself. We kept second-guessing everything, wondering if we were reading too much into the situation. But then we'd notice another similarity, a shared allergy, the same unusual freckle patterns on our arms, and our suspicions would flare up all over again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I got the call. The results were in. Sarah and I decided to go pick them up together. The drive to the clinic was tense, neither of us saying much. When we arrived, we signed the papers and were handed a sealed envelope. My hands felt shaky as I held it, but Sarah gave a small nod, and I opened it. We scanned the document together, eyes jumping from line to line, until we found the words. Probability of shared parentage. 99.9%. I read it again, just to be sure. The room seemed to tilt for a second. It was there in black and white. We shared a father. Sarah and I were half-sisters. The world around us seemed to blur for a moment. I didn't know what to say, and neither did she. We sat in silence, letting the reality sink in. We had come into this thinking we might uncover some family drama, some old secrets, but I don't think either of us expected this. Not really. It was like a bombshell, something that would change everything. We left the clinic in a daze, both of us processing what this meant for our lives, our families. We didn't speak much as we walked to the car, just exchanged glances filled with questions. What were we supposed to do now? Who should we tell first? Would we even tell anyone at all? We were standing on the edge of something huge, and we knew that whatever came next, it wouldn't be simple. The truth was out there now, and there was no going back. Update 3. After we found out we were half-sisters, Sarah and I agreed to keep the news to ourselves, at least for now. It was too big, too explosive to just blurt out. We both felt like we were sitting on a ticking time bomb, unsure of what to do next. We spent hours talking, trying to figure out a plan. Should we tell our fathers? How would they react? Would it destroy our families? It was hard to know what was the right thing to do. We decided to wait. Maybe we needed time to process, or maybe we were just scared. We avoided bringing it up around our families, acting like everything was normal. It felt strange to keep this huge secret while sitting at the dinner table or chatting about our day-to-day lives. We started meeting more often in quiet, out-of-the-way places, trying to piece together what had really happened all those years ago. But secrets have a way of coming out, no matter how hard you try to keep them buried. One afternoon, Sarah and I were at my house, talking in low voices about the DNA test. The papers spread out on the coffee table in front of us. We were going over everything again, trying to make sense of it all, when I noticed my mom coming down the hallway. I didn't think much of it at first until I realized she had stopped just outside the doorway. I could see her reflection in the mirror on the wall. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. I quickly tried to change the subject, to cover up what we were discussing, but it was too late. She had heard enough. She stepped into the room, her hands trembling, and her voice cracked as she asked what we were talking about. I knew there was no point in lying, not anymore. I took a deep breath and told her everything. Her reaction was immediate and intense. She sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. I had never seen her like this, so broken, so vulnerable. It was like all the strength had drained out of her in an instant. She started talking, words tumbling out between sobs. She confessed that she had had a brief affair with Sarah's dad, many years ago, around the time Sarah was conceived. It had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, and she had regretted it ever since. She insisted it was never meant to be serious, that it had ended quickly, and she had hoped the secret would stay buried forever. Hearing this, Sarah looked like she'd been punched in the gut. She stood there, stunned, while I tried to process what my mom was saying. My mom kept going, saying she'd never told anyone, not even my dad. She had convinced herself that Sarah wasn't my dad's child, that it was just a fling that meant nothing in the long run. She had wanted to protect her family, to keep everything intact. I realized then that my dad might have no idea about any of this. He might not know that my mom had an affair, that he might have another daughter out there. I felt a wave of confusion and disbelief. If my mom had hidden this for so long, what else could she be hiding? Then another thought hit me. Sarah's mom might also be keeping secrets. If my mom had kept this under wraps for decades, there was a good chance that Sarah's mom knew more than she was letting on too. Maybe there was another relationship overlap. Or maybe she had her reasons for keeping quiet. I needed to know the full story, and fast. I tried to get more information from my mom, but she was a wreck, crying and mumbling apologies. I didn't want to push her too hard, not in the state she was in. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what to do next. Sarah and I left my house, both of us shaken by everything that had just happened. We stood outside for a few minutes, not really sure what to say to each other. It felt like we had opened a door that should have stayed closed. I could tell that Sarah was struggling, too, trying to make sense of everything, trying to decide what this meant for her family and mine. We knew we couldn't keep this secret forever. Sooner or later, we'd have to decide whether to tell our fathers, whether to risk shattering their worlds with the truth. But how could we do that, knowing how much pain it would cause? How could we protect them while still being honest? As we were standing there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. It was from Sarah's mom, asking to meet in private, saying she needed to explain everything. I showed the text to Sarah, and we exchanged a look. This was it, another twist, another layer to this already tangled mess. I could see the worry in Sarah's eyes, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. What did her mom know that we didn't? What could she possibly explain that would make any of this easier to understand? We had no choice but to meet with her and find out. The secrets were piling up, and we needed answers, not just for us, but for our fathers and for our families. This wasn't just about our friendship anymore. It was about uncovering a truth that had been hidden for far too long. Update 5. The next day, Sarah and I made plans to meet with her mom. We chose a quiet cafe on the edge of town, where we could talk without too many prying eyes or ears. I could see the tension in Sarah's face as we waited, both of us unsure of what her mom was going to reveal. When she finally arrived, she looked nervous but determined, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time. She sat down across from us, took a deep breath, and began to speak. She explained that the affair between my mom and her husband had been more than just a brief fling. It had been a complicated, emotional entanglement that lasted longer than either of them wanted to admit. Both moms had found out about the affair, and it nearly tore their friendship apart. But there was more. Both moms had also agreed to keep everything quiet, not just because of the affair, but because there were other factors involved. Sarah's mom leaned in, lowering her voice, and revealed that there was a financial reason for all the secrecy. A hidden inheritance or a property dispute that neither family wanted to surface. Sarah's mom explained that years ago, when her husband and my dad were business partners, they had purchased a piece of land together. That land, over time, had significantly increased in value. However, due to the complexities of their personal lives and relationships, they decided to keep its existence under wraps, hidden even from their own children. There was a legal agreement in place that kept everything quiet, an agreement that tied their families together in more ways than one. If the affair or the true parentage of Sarah were ever revealed, it could cause a messy and costly legal battle, one that could ruin both families financially. Our moms had decided it was better to bury everything, to keep the peace, even if it meant living with secrets and lies. I sat there trying to piece together everything she was saying. The hidden land, the financial stakes, the tangled web of personal and professional relationships. It was more than I had imagined, more complicated than just an affair. Sarah seemed equally stunned, her eyes wide as she took it all in. With this new information, Sarah and I had a choice to make. We could confront our fathers with everything we had learned, risk tearing apart the fragile peace our families had maintained for so long, or we could keep quiet, just like our mothers had done. It was a decision neither of us was prepared to make lightly. We knew that telling the truth could mean opening old wounds, creating new ones, and possibly destroying the relationships we had known our whole lives. But keeping quiet would mean living with the weight of this secret, knowing that our fathers were in the dark about something so significant. After hours of discussion, we finally decided we couldn't keep this to ourselves any longer. We needed to be honest, to let the people who were most affected by this know the truth. So we made a plan to speak to my dad first. If anyone deserved to know, it was him. We chose a quiet evening, making sure he would be home without distractions. Sarah came over, and we sat down in the living room, waiting for the right moment. My dad looked puzzled by the serious expressions on our faces, sensing that something important was coming. I took a deep breath and started explaining everything: the DNA test, the affair, the hidden property. I laid it all out in a calm, measured way, trying to keep my voice steady. My dad listened in silence, his expression slowly changing from confusion to shock. When I finished, there was a long pause. He finally spoke, asking a few questions, and it became clear that while he was shocked, he wasn't entirely surprised. He admitted that he had always felt there was something off about the relationship between our two families. He had suspected, in the back of his mind, that there might be more to the story, but he never had proof. He sat there for a moment, digesting everything. Then he did something I didn't expect. He decided he needed to confront Sarah's father. He wanted answers, wanted to hear the other side of the story, and he was tired of all the secrets. I could see the determination in his eyes, a resolve to finally put everything out in the open, no matter the consequences. We made a plan to meet with Sarah's father the next day. The tension was thick as we arrived at his house. My dad knocked on the door, and Sarah's father opened it, looking puzzled to see us all there. My dad wasted no time. He got straight to the point. He laid out everything we had discovered, every piece of the tangled web of secrets, lies, and hidden dealings. At first, Sarah's father seemed taken aback, clearly not expecting this confrontation. But as my dad spoke, his expression shifted from confusion to understanding, and then to resignation. He seemed to realize that there was no point in denying any of it. He nodded slowly, admitting that he had known about the affair, had suspected Sarah might not be his, but he had chosen to ignore it, to protect his family and avoid any conflict. The conversation was long, filled with admissions and half apologies, both men exchanging stories of suspicions and regrets. There was no shouting, no angry accusations, just a tired acknowledgement of a complicated situation that had been hidden for too long. As the meeting came to an end, the fathers agreed to talk more, to figure out how to move forward, both for their sakes and for ours. It was a strange sense of relief to see them handling it so calmly, so maturely, despite everything that had been revealed. As we left, there was a sense of ambiguity hanging in the air. Nothing was resolved, not really, but at least the truth was out, and that was a start. Sarah and I exchanged a look, knowing that while the future was uncertain, at least it was out in the open now. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now.